Thanks for joining the Deal and R. Donnelly's IoT, the Internet of Things Dealmaking webcast. I'm Daniel Perez, Director of Business Strategy for Venue, the virtual data room solution at R. Donnelly. We'd like to make this roundtable a conversation not just with our panel of experts, but also with you. So please submit your questions using the posting feature on the side of your browser. Current Internet of Things projections are huge. By next year, nearly 6.5 billion objects will be connected to networks. But by 2020, projections show this number skyrockets to anywhere between 30 billion to 50 billion devices. These numbers mean deal making. The IoT is driving growth in M&A in telecom, software groups, device makers, and that's just getting started. Joining me today is Eric Lakin, Managing Director of Duff & Phelps, Bridget Carlin, Managing Director of IoT Strategy and Technology Office at Intel Corporation, and Michael Schrag, Research Fellow at MIT Sloan School's Initiative on the Digital Economy. So let's go and get started. So I think the first place to get started is to kind of take an eagle's eye view of IoT. You know, it's such a vast field, ranging from oil fields to hospitals to thermostats, even cars and drones. Bridget, how do you break this field down, and what are some categories that might be more ripe for investment than others?
Well, that's a big question, and I would echo what you said, that the expectation for the number of devices connected to the internet is really significant. We're expecting the 50 billion devices by 2020, which means not only is that a proliferation of devices, but that's also an explosion of data in the world of 44 zettabytes of data. So we're going to see more devices generating more data connecting to the internet. And the real question is, what do we do with that opportunity? What does that data offer us? And so when we break it down and look at market segments, I think you start with two basic categories. One is the consumer side, where you see consumer IoT devices, and the other is the industrial. And when we look at sort of the breakdown of where we're going to see the growth, by a large margin, the industrial side of the internet is really where we see that driving the IoT. And when we look at categories of industrial, I would say that let's start at some of the broader sectors. Health is expected to be quite large. Today it's about a $300 billion IoT market. It's expected to go to about $450 billion by 2020. Look at transportation, look at smart buildings, look at retail. These are all huge markets that range anywhere from 20 billion to 30, 50 billion by 2020. And then another category that we're starting to pay attention to are cities. Our cities are becoming smarter. And if you look at the totality of the opportunity there, we're looking at, what's today in the 20 or $30 billion range is expected to be around $119 billion. And that's largely comprised of transportation efficiencies and smart buildings.
If I could just follow up quickly on that, I think that Bridget did a very good job of just defining the industrial and the consumer, but by mentioning cities, there really is a third category, which is the infrastructure side. So if you're a GE or a Schneider Electric, you're going to be looking at your infrastructure business as a platform for Internet of Things. And the one thing I would modify in terms of this discussion of 20 to 50 to 100 billion devices connected on the Internet, the Internet of Things is not about the number of devices or objects on the Internet. It's about what kind of relationships exist between them. And what I find and what my colleagues at MIT find so interesting, and what people at Intel find so interesting about the Internet of Things in that regard, is it's not just about how do we use the Internet to exchange information, it's how do we use the Internet to facilitate behavior of objects and between objects that otherwise would never have occurred. So it's as much a relationship behavior issue as an information exchange issue.
Okay. So, building on you talking about relationships and how we're connected, within IoT, we all know there's going to be a big winner. What could you predict might be the Uber for IoT? If you can.
So I would, that's a huge question. I don't think anybody's got a crystal ball, but I think there are multiple winners of IoT. And I think that we're already starting to see those emerge. I mean, Uber's a great example.
Uber is an Uber of
Uber is and I think what we're starting to see is that there are categories of leaders that are starting to emerge. Mm-hmm. And I think this is something, we see, the great success of, one of the largest retailers that doesn't own any inventory is Alibaba. One of the largest accommodation providers that doesn't own any real estate is Airbnb. One of the largest media content owners is Facebook, and they don't really create any content. Their users create the content. So you start to see these category leaders emerge. And I think one of the things that we should also mention is we're really at the beginning of this frontier. Mm-hmm. This is clearly a new era of technology where when we talk about devices being connected to the internet, we're also talking about them becoming smarter and then connecting to each other. So I think the opportunities are still yet to be determined. And I think we're starting to see some of that success happen now.
To put a slight twist on this, when you talk about the Internet of Things and the taxonomy and typology of the Internet of Things, there's going to be the bottom-up opportunity. We have devices, can we create value by connecting them together? Or we have chips, can we create value by putting them together? But then there's the top-down thing. Mm-hmm. We have a system, we have a building, we have an ecosystem, we have a region. Mm-hmm. Should we be getting devices and technologies and people interconnected to optimize the region? And then you have the diagonal thing, which is what Uber did to taxis and rent-a-cars, which is, if we connect things in interesting ways and add value via information and apps to those connections, can we create a new kind of business, a new kind of industry? So you have the horizontal, you have the vertical, and you have the diagonal. And I can say with complete confidence that it's too early to say who the winner is going to be.
Following up on that, Michael, I would say that the notion of what is the next Uber, what is the Uber of IoT, I would say that, and maybe you touched on this, is that Uber is IoT,
yes,
and it is part of IoT. There will be many Ubers, or not necessarily in that particular industry, but many game-changing industries and game-changing companies that will modify the way we look at interconnectivity and the relationship between machines and humans and this entire area. In fact, I would go so far as to say that the manner in which we use language to describe what these things are, IoT, the internet, et cetera, it's outdated almost today,
right.
Because language is such an important thing. We had a discussion earlier about how do we define what IoT is, and IoT touches so many things.
Mm-hmm. Or ideally everything. But let's just play with this Uber thing. So let's come up with a conservatively $50 billion a year IoT extension for Uber. If I were on Uber's board, what's the easiest thing to do leveraging what Uber has in an IoT context to make Uber more valuable? Okay, taxi, pickup, et cetera. How about delivery services? Okay, and there'll be Uber trucks that have, we know which ones have refrigeration or certain kinds of safety features so they can carry food or electronic devices. And so all of a sudden Uber is competing with FedEx, UPS, the USPS, so they're in the delivery business in that regard. And they leverage all of their geospatial and mapping stuff and their drivers and call up to move into that kind of business as well. That's not a huge leap. And it's not just, and this is key, it's not just an information exchange because you need the right kind of vehicles for the right kind of deliveries. And we can go one step further. We can instrument the vehicle. So in the same way you have a QR code or a product code on there, you can put something on the box to make sure that the food is fresh or the fish stays cold, the electronics haven't been shaken too much, etc. So bang, Uber has now become an Uber of an Internet of Things.
Yeah, and what we're really talking about here is that the IoT is offering us an opportunity for disruptors to come into the market, and through the connection of devices connecting to the internet, devices connecting to each other to share data, to extract new information or richer insights from that information. I think what we're seeing is that the disruptors can come into the market with these new models and these new capabilities, and it's changing how we do business. It's transforming businesses, transforming our communities, transforming our lives.
And Bridget is too modest to point out that no matter what disruptor comes in, they'll be using silicon chips to enable these.
Well, if they want the best performance, and we have the best security. But yeah, I mean, I think that
this is like the gold rush, where are you making the shovels and the buckets, and to a certain extent, this is one of the ways that the Intel ecosystem wants to position itself.
So talking about these game changers and these early leaders in the categories, Eric, can you touch on, we have this projection of 50 billion devices in the next 4 years. How do you separate the hype from the substance?
Well, I've been asked that question before, and I'm not so concerned about the hype right now, or the froth, or whatever it may be. I kind of would compare this to where we were in the nascent days of the internet in the late 1990s, early 2000s. You're going to have a lot of activity in a lot of different areas, and we have to see what works. Naturally, we have to focus on things such as standards and security and the infrastructure, but in terms of the actual services that are delivered, the devices that are developed, the businesses that are built within the IoT sphere. I'm less concerned about hype right now. I'm more interested in seeing a lot of innovation, and we're seeing it. We're seeing innovation throughout the space. We're seeing the IBMs of the world and the Intels and Microsofts of the world and many foreign conglomerates focus on what's happening in IoT today. I mean, you take a look at the new tie-up between Johnson Controls and Tyco that was announced just recently. That has the potential for tremendous impact in the IoT world. Why? Because they're producing the devices that manage and control the buildings that are being built today, and you'll have the management of these two companies come together to build a whole new suite of products and services that we haven't even thought of today.
I would also, it's interesting. A year or so ago, we were sort of observing that there is a lot of hype, right? There's a lot of hype with IoT and, Internet of Things. And I think what we're seeing in 2016 is that we're starting to live up to the hype. We're starting to see adoption. We're starting to see new applications for the Internet of Things. Devices are becoming smart and connected, and I think that's one of 3 or so trends that we're starting to witness. A second example is that computers are gaining senses. Right, so instead of seeing something in 2D, now you can see it in 3D. So there's what we call the sensification of computing. Right. That's a trend that's starting to happen. And then the third one is, that the computer is now becoming an extension of you. Right, so it may have started with our Fitband or our smartwatch and our smartphone. We don't go anywhere without our smartphone. We go back and get it. But I think these 3 trends are starting to show that the hype is now starting to take hold, and we're getting into a reality sector, and adoption is happening. And I think what's also evidence of that is we know from some of the industry analysts that 5.5 million devices in 2016 are connecting every day. And $2.5 million is being spent on IoT hardware every minute. Wow. So the hype is now starting to move into a reality.
In fact, I would say that the hype is it's not just hype. This is what I would consider the ultimate convergence. A few years ago, we talked about telephony and television and computing convergence. Today, the convergence really is about our interaction with all of these devices. We are part of the convergence, and it's going to change society.
Well, actually, I two quick things. One is, what I find interesting about the Internet of Things is this is going to be a convergence without the human intervention involved. I think that humans out of the loop is what makes this a more interesting thing. But in regards to the hype point, there's this wonderful line from Kenneth Boulding: you can divide the world into 2 groups of people, those who divide the world into 2 groups of people and those who don't. There's 2 kinds of hype here. There's the media hype, but then there's also the investment hype. I think it is fair to say that we're in the early stage of a hype cycle as to whether Internet of Things is a great investment opportunity. The notion that the Internet of Things is not going to be pervasive has been described. I think that's not hype. I think that's a given. It's not those numbers about things interconnecting aren't made up. The amount of money spent on these things to facilitate their interconnection, how you monetize that, where investors should invest, I think that's not as clear. I think Intel has some good ideas about where to invest. It begins with I, perhaps. But those are the kinds. I think we do need to draw a line between investment hype versus real-world operational hype. The latter point, I think, has been made very clear here. The Internet of Things as a everyday phenomenon is really not a hype. How it ultimately plays out is not clear.
But I think we're seeing, companies today that, when I mentioned earlier that the industrial internet is really driving IoT. Right. And so when we look at those market segments, health, retail, transportation, energy, right? These are areas where companies are investing now because there's real return, right? So there is operational efficiencies and reducing costs. There are new business models and new revenue streams that are enabled. We have examples with some of our customers and partners. We work with Levi's. And there's a fantastic retailer. We all wear the jeans and know the garments and whatnot. And so one of the things that as a retailer, from an industry standpoint, something like $1.1 trillion are lost every year on potential sales because of out of stocks, or the wrong product is on is not on the right shelf, that kind of thing. And so what we've been partnering with them on is using IoT, using RFID sensors, and being able to extract near real-time data to get information from the clerk in the store, making sure the right inventory, the right color, the right size is on the shelf. So when the shopper comes in, he's getting the right colored jeans and the right size and that sort of thing. So I think what we're seeing here is that the companies that are embracing and adopting this technology, they are receiving specific hard ROI benefits from doing so.
Okay. Did you?
Well, I would echo what you're saying, and it's in so many different industries. An example would be the John Deere company, and how they are now they've launched an initiative that allows you essentially to run your tractor in your field without even being in the tractor. You can run it from your cell phone. This is IoT enabled, internet enabled, satellite enabled technology that allows the farmer to manage his fields from the comfort of his living room if necessary. So that's exciting stuff, and it's a real disruptor. Now think about the implications of being able to draw out the data from all of those sensors and feed them into various master databases that will give analysts or buyers in the market a real-time understanding of how the crop is doing. Tremendous opportunities there.
Then we can go to the ultimate Internet of Things, which are algorithmic, high-frequency trading things. We can interconnect that precision farming data to a commodity, to the Chicago Board Options Exchange, and do high-frequency trading of options and commodity futures, et cetera, in that regard. You could do that with equities as well. The whole notion of the interpenetration between real-world sensing and instrumentation and the kind of transactions you wish to enable, eliminating a stock out, consummating a trade, those worlds are converging.
And what I like what you're saying there, Michael, because, and you mentioned this a bit ago, and that is that we have machine-to-machine learning. And we're having these devices now without the human interaction, sharing data. And
humans are an impediment.
Yes, step out of the way, please.
Yeah. But I think that's something else that when we're starting on this journey with IoT, and we start with making things smart, connecting them. And then once we get, we've connected the unconnected, we've made things smart and connected, and the next thing where we're going is this autonomous capability where machines are learning from each other, they're sharing data, and now it's not just deriving insights from that data, but now it's triggering actions, right? And so I think that's where you see the promise of IoT starting to happen.
And to follow up on that, not only do we have concerns over regulation, but specifically to machine-to-machine learning, ethics. How do we bake in ethics that are approachable and workable for all of us as it relates to machines communicating and learning from each other and taking actions on our behalf?
I'm always leery of the ethical conversations because, but I want to tie this in on the machine-to-machine stuff, and this is actually quasi-ethical but quasi-operational, which is you're an Uber driver and you're about to accept a bid. But the next generation of Uber software says, actually, if you accept this, you're going to be stuck in traffic and it'll cut down the number of trips that you would ordinarily make. So it advises you, don't bid. Don't bid. For this kind of trip where they want to go, don't bid. Right now, that's the Uber driver's discretion. I'm going to predict with a high degree of confidence before the end of next year, one of the Uber software upgrades will be advising people what to take, or there'll be some sort of bootleg app that says, hey, given the traffic patterns that exist, in 15 minutes there's going to be surge pricing, you'll make a killing. Don't do anything for 15 minutes. And then there'll be the ethical questions about whether you should hold off or take them. But the problem is whenever anybody deals with these things, it becomes ethical and legal, and those end up to be, to my mind, less interesting conversations, unless, of course, you're religiously inclined, or legally inclined, and regulatorily inclined.
So before we move on, I just want to go back to one thing that you guys were both talking about, disruptors. We're talking about the leaders that are emerging in the space, but are there any industries that you think might suffer from all this disruption?
Well, I don't think it's a matter of industries automatically suffering. It's a matter of which industries are going to innovate, which industries are going to adapt, and we are in an inflection point of great change that will last for the next several decades. And I think that there are companies and industries that are working on this now, but if you're asleep at the helm, you can forget about it.
I'll stick with the example I offer. If a UPS or a FedEx is a laggard, and they basically say, well, the most important thing we need to do is have better drivers and better trucks, I think they will pay a price, because in fact there will be quasi-autonomous vehicles. There will be ways of an Uber-like organization to skim their margins in this regard. And I think those are enabled exactly by the kind of technological innovations Bridget discussed. That infrastructure is going to facilitate that. So, but I agree with Eric's point, which is that people really at threat are the ones who say that we should think of Internet of Things as a series of incremental improvements to what we're already doing now, as opposed to an opportunity for fundamental business disruption. Because it is. Yeah,
and I would just say that there's opportunities in the market, and I think innovation is really being inspired here by what we've now we started to see some examples of new business models, new capabilities, and so I don't know that industries are really being hurt, but I would recharacterize it in the sense of the earlier you can leverage the Internet of Things, I think the benefits and leadership is your opportunity. I think that it's a miss if you don't start thinking about that. If you haven't started investing, you need to be looking at, it's probably not a good thing, right? I mean, this notion of how can your own assets perform better for you. So, I mean, that's the first question, right? You have all these assets. A great example is we talk about sensors, right? We have sensors, and oil industry is a great example. There already are sensors on oil rigs. There's an oil company who's got some 30,000 sensors on their rig, and today only 1% of that data is being used. Okay, and it's not for, so...
But it's $28 a barrel, who cares?
But I mean, I think that just starts to illustrate that there are these opportunities now, like what can your assets be telling you if you were able to connect and get the data off of them, and what can you learn and what can you do? How can you monetize that data?
The one twist that I want to put on what Bridget is saying is it's not just, and this is what you said is very, very important, it's what are your assets telling you? The difference is with the Internet of Things, it's not just what your assets are telling you. What are your assets in a position to do? Mm-hmm. I believe the Internet of Things is not just about the exchange of information, but actual actions, actual physics, actual decisions. So it's like that Uber car, that Uber app that advises the driver, don't do this pickup.
What you might ask, though, is, okay, so we talked about the opportunity, we talked about some disruptors, we talked about, the hype versus reality, it's starting to emerge, a lot of devices coming online. But I think there's an undercurrent here, so why isn't it going faster? Why isn't it going faster, right? And this makes sense, there's a return, all this sort of thing, and I think that there are 3 or 4 things that are truly fundamental challenges for the IoT to really kick off. One of them is security. Right? All these 50 billion devices coming onto the internet, those are 50 billion opportunities for potential vulnerability, right? So that's an issue. And at Intel, we believe very strongly that you've got to integrate security at the hardware level, at the silicon level, where you've integrated hardware. And we feel like we have a unique opportunity to help that along. Integrate security with an immutable identification at that hardware device level, and then carry that security all the way up through the software stack. So security is number 1. Number 2, and we've talked about that, and that's this notion of lots of devices talking to each other. We have this issue of standards we talked about. we are lacking standards with IoT to make this go a little faster. And we're aware of that, right? At Intel, we've started...
Intel's the other view. It's not there's an absence, there are too many standards. Intel would like fewer standards. It's easier to economies of scale. With,
and standards is always one of those things that's a journey, right? That takes years, so I think that's an issue. And then the other thing is this notion of operation technology, like your heating and air conditioning, your elevator systems, now converging with information technology. So now all of a sudden we're instrumenting things, we want it to talk together because now we can, set the temperature in the room and that sort of thing.
in real time.
In real time, right? So we have this convergence of OT and IT, as we call it. And then I think the other one that is a challenge for us is this notion of connectivity and having communications. There's lots of different communication protocols, data formats. Now we're ingesting all this data from those sensors. How do we get it secured and get it, trusted into a whole communications loop back to the internet and then back out to the person who needs the information. So those are real challenges that need to be worked by actually the whole ecosystem in order for IoT to really, really accelerate.
Well, Eric, staying on that topic of security, can you comment on security concerns with IoT and how that might vary from industry to industry?
Well, there have been many topics here already that address the vulnerabilities of systems and the value that is attached to the data that these systems manage, transmit, contain. And if we've all have seen what has happened with cybercrime over the last 10, 15 years, particularly the last couple of years, the explosion is only going to get bigger because we are going to have billions of devices all connected. So
we can argue, forgive the quick interjection, but Stuxnet is a good example of the Internet of Things cybercrime or cyber vandalism, of course, or cyber espionage. But that was really the first globally public Internet of Things security breach.
Exactly. So Stuxnet is a worm that is designed to attack the centrifuge machines in Iran and to spin them up so quickly that they actually blow up. And this was a very sophisticated and tactical attack that worked. We'll probably see more of that. And I agree with Bridget that one of the answers is baking security in at the silicon level, right at the chip, and working up from there. But on the other hand, you also have to have the ability to manage updates and manage the security as the vulnerabilities evolve, because the hackers are always looking for new ways to get in. I hearken back to what happened this last summer with Chrysler when there was obviously a hack into the Chrysler car, and they were forced to recall over 1 million cars. Why? Because they had no way to remotely get into those cars and update the software. They hadn't thought through, evidently, what is the security posture of the chips and the software that are running those cars. Well, you contrast that to another hack that happened last summer with Tesla. Tesla had thought about these issues, and within a week, they were able to push out a patch over the internet to the entire fleet of Tesla cars globally, fixing the problem. So
Eric is saying something very, very important here, which is, we talk about in the old days in Deming, instead of you don't inspect quality in, you design it in. You instead of inspecting or retrofitting security, you design it in. But the maintenance point that he's making is a very profound point, because the Internet of Things is not you build something, then you ship it, and they interconnect. You're shipping these things with the expectation that it's going to be upgraded in firmware, that as the machines learn from another, as you learn how to optimize these things, you'll be able to download or upload technology or next generation software that allow these things to perform better, interact better, learn better. So designing a component with the expectation that you're going to upgrade it is different than designing a component with the expectation that you're shipping it. Most manufacturers ship things that when they break, you fix them. Now, with Internet of Things, you want to ship things that you can remotely diagnose, do predictive analytics, and upgrade. And respectfully, the automobile manufacturers aren't there yet.
And Michael, to that point, the automobile manufacturers are sophisticated manufacturers.
Yes.
Let's think about the average Joe manufacturer who's making some
Exactly.
small device that you're putting in your home.
Precisely.
You expect it to work, and suddenly there's a vulnerability. Hackers can get in. They're going to, your toaster is going to that is
Target
connected.
issue, the target thing through HVAC, exactly.
Suddenly it blows up and your house burns down. So think about the liability issues for these.
Well, I'll tell you, the
organizations.
cars, this is, this is a real example. You can turn on the TV and see, car commercials about I'm connecting and I've got my music and this and that. So when we think about cars, I like to think about cars as they're one of the most sophisticated mobile IoT devices that are out there, right? I mean, the car is now becoming a center point for some, not only do they have sensors telling us about road conditions, about how the engine's going, but now it's delivering our infotainment, right? The music, maybe videos, a number of different things. We can now do payments from the car, right? So now the car is becoming like its own little data center, right? It's got applications coming into it, it's collecting data, it's processing data, it's interacting with the people in the vehicle. So the car is something, when we talk about security, is absolutely fundamental. And now we're, from a processor standpoint, you absolutely are going to see more processors in vehicles. And that's why we come back to security. It's got to be in at that processor level and then continue all the way up because of these vulnerabilities that whether it's, maybe somebody, we talk about the connected car capability. That absolutely is something that with all these different applications and services coming into the car, they're not all made by the same vendors, right? So that level of security is going to vary based on, who's your service from.
But let's take a real world issue that was worth billions of dollars. I believe it's the Takata, the airbags that would go off inappropriately. Now, here you are, you're an automobile manufacturer, you're being provided with airbags, you care a lot about safety. Here is a simple $10 billion question. In your automobile, in your Internet of Things in the automobile, do you want to allow the airbag to trigger all on its own, or should there be another check in there? So deceleration, is it something, a sensor in the front, the back, the side, whatever? Do you give a monopoly to the airbag, or do you create a high speed? It has to be high speed. We can't have latencies of half a second in an automobile accident. It has to be like that. So these are huge questions. I'm sure very smart people are addressing these questions. The difference is, literally 3 to 5 years ago, they didn't have to think in these terms. Now you do.
Now you do.
And now if you're an airbag provider, you better have a standard or an interface that allows your airbag to communicate with the rest of the car to make sure you don't have accidents or to minimize the chance of an accident occurring. That's a classic IoT issue, and you didn't even, I would wager it wasn't even on the drawing board 5 or 6 years ago in Detroit.
Right.
So then, what about privacy? What kind of problems could privacy hold for IoT?
Because IoT changes the game socially for the world, particularly the developed world now, privacy becomes critical. And privacy can't be looked at simply as privacy as we may interpret it here sitting in New York. Privacy has a different meaning in the EU, as an example. You have the whole initiative of the right to be forgotten, by example. How do you get your IoT sensors to forget you? Or do you want them to? And then, of course, in China, there's an entirely different idea and understanding of what privacy constitutes and the relationship between the individual and the state. So I think privacy is a big issue, and as to whether or not it's going to be standards driven or if it's going to be baked in very early on in the manufacturing process is still a bit of an unknown, I believe. But I think from a security perspective and the perspective of the bad guys who are out there looking to compromise systems, that's tied in clearly to privacy, security, access, and I assure you, as we sit here today, we're going to learn of terrible hacks that take place here in the US and elsewhere of individuals who are able to break into systems. Look at the medical world and look at the Anthem hack of last year with 80 million subscribers of Anthem and their data being compromised. These are where the sort of the value proposition is for the bad guys. They want to get in, they want to take the data.
Well, I think the data privacy is a fundamental issue. I put that, when we talked about the big challenges with IoT, security and data privacy are, I think, fundamental. But it's interesting. There's a practical view that says, how many of us, still, order things online and put all of our credit card information, all that,
Right.
and it's sort of like, gosh, if I was that worried, but I want it delivered by tomorrow, and we're doing it, right? So there's a practical view of, yeah, I know, but it's convenient and I want it. But I would also say that, so there's a sometimes convenience sort of overshadows what, maybe it's not the right thing to do, or it's kind of dangerous, but I need it, so I just do it. When we talk about our opportunity for IoT, this issue of data privacy, I think there are requirements to where maybe you want location information, but do they have to know it's Eric or it's Bridget? I just need to know that maybe someone's
What
there.
does anonymization
And it's the anonymization of the data and being able to preserve identity without being able, to sort of prevent a convenience of some sort or something like that. And so I think there's this anonymization capability that goes hand in hand with the privacy side.
I'll throw two additional sort of concepts in there, and one of them is, I want to talk about encryption, if we can, because I think encryption is one of the answers to the security issue, if it can be baked in at a very low level. But I also want to say that from a privacy perspective, I think privacy is evolving in America, particularly. Look at Facebook. The younger generation freely gives their privacy away. It has a different.
That's why they're the younger generation.
and privacy has a different sort of value, perhaps. There's a different equation. And then you look at how, even today, security in IoT is somewhat, well, it's already broken, I should say, or maybe it hasn't been fixed yet in many ways. I'm reminded.
There are new challenges, right? That's part of what you're really talking about, is that with IoT, there are just new challenges that maybe we didn't have to worry about a year ago, now we do.
But I think you're being a little too, now I'm going to be not cynical, but yeah, I'll be cynical. I think one of the gating factors for IoT is that if I am a manufacturer, if I am relying upon IoT innovations to improve my competitiveness in a global, and I'm picking the phrase global deliberately, global market, I am concerned because in the same way government asks for a backdoor into telecommunication systems or mobile phones, I believe, and I'm highly confident that, Stuxnet being one example, governments are going to ask for backdoor or ready access to IoT ensembles. And so here I am, I have a choice. I can be more efficient, but I can have I can have people I don't want shutting me down or inspecting me. And this may make me hesitant to invest, because if I'm in China, I may not want the Chinese with the turnkey ability to interfere or siphon off in an industrial espionage form the way I run my plants. So, and same thing, if I'm doing something in Europe, I may not want the EU to be able to shut something down because we have a tax dispute. So I think the issue of regulation, legal intervention, matters every bit as much as illegal intervention, and I think that's up in the air too. And that was exactly your point. Is there going to be, in the same way there's a right to forget, is there a right to treat machine, because it's a machine it fits a certain standard. That standard allows us or enables us as a regulator to make sure that you're doing quality things well, blah, blah, blah. I think that's going to be I think that's going to cause people to hesitate to be at the cutting edge of innovation.
So, Bridget, you talked earlier about standards for IoT, and how important it is for how it works. Or can you touch on how important it would be to create economies of scale, or the importance for all of these devices to actually work together?
Yeah, so I do think that standards is fundamental to the adoption of IoT. And it's interesting, we're not alone in thinking that. There are some 80 plus different standards bodies over the last 2 years that have emerged just to address this challenge of standards. And so it is definitely a big issue. There are a couple of standards bodies that have emerged as sort of leading the charge, if you will. One of them is the Industrial Internet Consortium, the IIC. Intel's a founding member, but along with public, private, and academia, there are some 250 members and growing, where we have companies like Cisco and IBM and Microsoft, SAP, as well as Schneider Electric, Honeywell, as well as agencies and universities that are coming together to define the basically test beds and frameworks for interoperability. Mm-hmm. So this notion of, in the absence of standards, let's start to figure out how our different technologies are going to work.
That's a keyword, interoperability.
And I think that because that has emerged, because you have the elevator system that's going to want to talk to the network or whatever it might be, you've got to work that through. Otherwise, everybody loses, right? So there's the opportunity and an interest in addressing that with the IIC. And then the second body that's emerged more around the specs or the standard side is the Open Internet Consortium, the OIC. And that Intel's also a founding member of that body, but it's also with Microsoft and IBM, and there's a number of companies that are literally coming together to define a device-to-device specification. So one of the things that as you start to think through this notion of standards, the reality is there isn't any single company that has IoT, has everything for IoT. You asked earlier, what's the Uber of IoT? It's not like that. In fact, you're seeing that IoT is showing that there is a complexity to making all this work and talk to each other and data sharing and all this sort of thing and the security elements. So there's this interesting phenomenon happening where you have this sort of co-opetition. You have competitors working together, you have partners working together, and we come away realizing that it really does take the whole ecosystem to start really making this work.
I do. The frenemies phenomenon.
If I'll jump in there just add a comment here. I mean, this laissez-faire sort of approach to finding standards globally through different organizations and different commercial relationships is clearly the way it's going to happen. But the risks are dramatic. As an example, if your tablet doesn't work, okay, it's something you can kind of get over, right? But if it gets hacked into or something breaks, but if you're autonomous or semi-autonomous vehicle that you've just programmed to take you to your office and then drop you off and leave and go and pick up your kids and take them to school, if that doesn't work, and we're talking about moving objects, and so from a liability perspective, litigation perspective, I think there's a ripe world out there for examining those issues too.
I think it would be good to be a lawyer in this.
Oh yes.
Liability issues. Okay. Yeah.
So Michael, going back to what you said about some cross-border implications with IoT, from a geographic perspective, where are the interesting or opportunities from different regions in the world?
Well, I think without question the OECD countries are in a fantastic position. I think, and this shouldn't surprise anybody, that Germany with its Mittelstand companies and its export orientation and its high-tech componentry, they really have an incentive on this. So I'll just name drop one company, BASF, world's largest chemical manufacturer. They take this kind of stuff very seriously because of the scale of the commodities that they're doing and the global reach and delivery, but also the specialty chemicals. But I also don't think we can knock down or minimize in any way, shape, or form China. And the odd.
Well, China's expected to be, 1/4 of the IoT market. So, I mean, they're not only, a player, they're critical, I think, in terms of the adoption of IoT. And, they're participating in these standards bodies. Huawei is a member of the IIC. And so I think that this notion of being
able. America can't acquire what?
Okay. But the notion here is that we find ourselves more interconnected as an economy, frankly.
This issue of we can talk all we want about technological determinism and the technological imperative, but this interpenetration, this convergence, ultimately the laws, the regulations, the politics, the differing perceptions of national interest, that is a wild card for all of this.
And there's great cross-pollination. You mentioned Germany as an example. IBM just announced that it's launching its Watson IoT Global
Exactly.
Center in Germany with 1,000 engineers there. And of course, they'll have 5 other centers around the planet. So all of these various nations will be cross-pollinated by American firms and European firms coming here, Chinese firms, et cetera.
Very much so.
Yeah, but this is, I think, you know the phrase that certain kinds of companies, and of course the investors, watching this are probably sick of this phrase, but born digital companies are different than companies that become digitally transformed. We are moving into an era where there's going to be born global IoT, because IoT is almost inherently a global phenomenon because of the various devices and things.
The internet.
It's the internet. It's as internet is right. It's as global as the internet.
Going back to the discussion on vocabulary.
Right.
I predict the term IoT will probably go away. I mean, because IoT.
Well, it is if you don't make the clear distinctions that I like to.
It is the internet. It is all of our connectivity, and we all are participating in it.
Right, but one way, just to be very glib, but in a useful, I think of IoT as social media for machines. And I think the
machines have feelings too.
Well, we will. There's a wonderful researcher, Roz Picard at MIT, who is a leader in affective computing, and the whole notion of how one picks up on emotions in this regard, and whether computers have emotions or not. We'll leave to a future in.
Well, they're gaining senses. We know that, right?
Yes.
They're absolutely gaining senses, and I think that the issue that you really want to confront here is that a lot of the most interesting innovations in IoT will be done independent of human intervention.
Wow.
When you have machines learning from each other, you have self-organizing systems. And it will not surprise me at all, and this is going to happen sooner rather than later, but sooner being before 2020, some engineering group is going to come into the NOC, the Network Operating Center, overseeing interconnections at a GE or Schneider Electric or at a Verizon or Vodafone Network Operating Center, and they're going to see that the machines that talk to each other organized load allocations differently. Not because of their plans, but because of the way they have been programmed to interact.
And I think what Michael's touching on here is, we're starting here with IoT. We're talking about this new frontier we're embarking on and how things are getting connected. And where is that taking us? And I think that we're moving from this smart and connected world into an autonomous software-defined world. So when we talk about being able to field program something because now it's, it was designed to do this, but I'd like to, because of the conditions, I want to change its workload and do something different. These are capabilities that we're working on today. And where that is taking us is being able to, from a software-defined perspective, either whether it's autonomous activities or whether it's something that is changing.
Machine learning.
It's machine learning. That is what you're starting to see. And this is where we're starting and laying the new infrastructure, if you will,
exactly.
for this to happen.
But we will have, seriously, the destiny of Internet of Things are machines that collaboratively are smarter than you are. Not you, Daniel, but that people are.
So Michael, I would agree with you, and I would take it to its next logical conclusion, which we were discussing earlier, which is that it's not just about the software and about the machines learning from each other, it's about the data that is the result of all of that.
That's what enables them to learn.
I've been terming it the data state. We actually become a world that is absolutely dependent strictly on the data.
I just want this to reinforce the important point that Bridget was making, that one of the things that makes Internet of Things particularly interesting is it used to be there's data, you'd only sample pressure, or now these are multispectral, multimodal systems. We ordinarily think of 5 senses. When you're talking about machines, we can get up to 100 senses and instrument. And something that can learn from 100 different modalities is likely to learn more faster than someone or something that only has 5. So this is the multimodal dimensionality of Internet of Things, I think, is one of the wild cards for the future capabilities going forward.
Absolutely. And we talked about, over the past, years, we've talked about artificial intelligence, and we've talked about what does this mean. And while these are notions and concepts and, prototypes being built, now we're upgrading our infrastructure. Talk about a data society. Absolutely is happening. And you talked about, all the fun things about IoT and the connected car. Those are important, but what is also it's an important infrastructure upgrade that we're experiencing that is basically building the path toward that capability,
which will allow the sort of artificial intelligence and sort of the miniaturization of silicon and the chip and bigger broadband to really converge and to represent itself as this promise of IoT.
So with the convergence and the the upgrades, we've been talking about growth. It's obvious that M&A is proliferating due to IoT. Bridget, do you expect there to be a broader ecosystem consolidation due to it, or what's your thought there?
Who should you buy?
Yeah, let me put my crystal ball here. I'll tell you, there's a couple things that are going on, right? So we have consolidation happens when there is motivation for companies to acquire either some technology they don't have or some capabilities and talents and so forth, so that they can strengthen their own position. So in that sense, there's some consolidation happening. We've seen a few of that over the last few years, companies buying other companies, and that's definitely underway. So there is, and it's across multiple types of categories, right? If you go into any of the sectors of technology, but also industry. Okay, so there's that, and that's really from a position of strengthening and so on. There's also, one of the things I also like to point out is that innovation is very well alive, and we are seeing new startups coming onto the scene, which I find very exciting and critically important to the success and livelihood of IoT, among other things. And so the number of new startups that are coming onto the scene, either they're coming up with new business models or their innovation on technology, it's one of the reasons why I can say from an Intel standpoint, we pay close attention to support the developer community and the maker community. This is something that innovation is coming up all over the place in all geographies.
There's too much focus on unicorns and not on people who are doing real innovation. Yeah. That's the dangerous hype, that there's too much focus on the billion-dollar thing as opposed to the kind of things that Intel's venture capital group has identified that feeds into the kind of ecosystem they want to create.
So I think you have, whenever there's a healthy sector, and I think this is not only are we, emerging into a very exciting area, but the sort of traditional companies are realizing that they need to reimagine themselves and their services and their capabilities. Just because you mentioned Uber before, just because they were a service-based company, maybe they should build a car. Just because you did.
They hired. You should point out who they hired.
Yes.
so
they made an acquisition of talent.
A decade ago, we would think that maybe Intel would acquire the robotics department of Carnegie Mellon University. Now it's Uber that did that. And I don't know if anybody, you can tell us, is anybody at Intel kicking themselves that Uber got that talent?
Intel has some very talented people, yes, so with all due respect to them.
Okay.
But we accept and enjoy brilliance from everywhere. But I will tell you that those are the kinds of things that are happening where just because traditionally you didn't maybe do this before, this is an opportunity to reimagine who you are and what you want to be. And that's where the consolidation comes into play. But as I mentioned, I think the innovation that we're seeing is equally as important. And what we're now seeing that, we talked about the disruptors, I think this is a very exciting time for an investment opportunity, because you will be seeing companies that are coming onto the scene that are identifying things that you need to pay attention to, and they could hold big promise.
My prediction is that Intel either acquires or sets up the Internet of Things counterpart to a Watson, because they have lots of information. They have to manage all of these interconnections. How can Intel do as good a job of managing data as fabricating chips, designing and fabricating chips? Feel free to disagree with that.
Oh, I think there's all kinds of opportunity.
So there's opportunity in the hardware space, the infrastructure space. There's clearly a lot of opportunity in the services space and in the software space. I think about where we were in the late 90s and in trying to search for something on the internet. It was kind of tough, right? We had a few search engines, and Hotbot and these fun search engines. Alta Vista, right? Yeah. And Google comes along and cleans house. How do you search the Internet of Things? Well, we just came across a search engine that you can log on and search. It's indexing the Internet of Things. It's looking for cameras and devices and sensors, and some that are even open. because they're not secure, and that's a risk and a concern. You can actually drill in and go into a camera in Chile or Japan or San Bernardino and see what's happening because people haven't secured their IoT systems. So search, I think, is another interesting area for development and for opportunity.
Are there enough software developers to support the boom?
Oh boy.
No, right? I mean, yes and no, right? I mean, it's one of those things where I think it's a huge, huge market. And, I don't know that
you said it's a good opportunity to be a lawyer. It's a good time to be a software developer, too.
I'm going to say that at the turn of, forgive me, but at the turn of the 20th century, people saying, are there enough telephone operators?
Yeah.
And of course, they designed the phone so that everybody became a telephone operator. You used the switch and you dialed the number. I think, and I'm not saying anything particularly bold or profound, I do think that the rise of the Internet of Things is going to drive the democratization, not of coding per se, but of certain kinds of soft and simple programming. The first, I forget the name of the, there's this wonderful simple language, FIFO. There's going to be a bunch of very simple languages and interfaces to make these things. Everybody is going to become, if not a coder, a programmer.
Well, and what is happening today is that we have development kits, right? Development kits that you typically would have been some, maybe geeky type person that's tinkering with something. Okay, fine. Now it's, the young student in an elementary school, right? We have developer kits that are very plug and play and make innovation very easy. And that's really, I mean, from an Intel standpoint, but from any of us in the market here, innovation is a good thing, right? Because we don't know what the next Uber is going to be, right? Is that going to be you? Is that going to be your kid? I mean, it's one of those things where, so when we talk about are there enough software programmers and developers, I think that you don't necessarily have to go have a computer science degree in order to be a maker or an inventor.
No, it helps if you drop out of school. But being absolutely serious, there's a thing that Bridget is saying in passing that I think actually is a Schwerpunkt and a center of gravity here. What you need to look at going forward is who is doing the best job of cultivating developer communities. Apple did a very good job with the App Store. Google's done a good job. Microsoft, once upon a time, did a great job. Now they're coming back in this regard. Intel, I'm on Intel's email list. Intel's investment in not just an American, global developer community is huge. So the real signal to look at is not just what Bridget is saying here, but how are they educating the developer community to service and add value to the Internet of Things. And based on the emails and invitations to seminars I've gotten, they're taking it very, very seriously.
Very seriously. It is, and the other point I want to make, and I didn't mean to gloss over this, but it's really important, is that innovators are right next to you. And you will have an idea, and how many of us have been talking to friends or something, I thought about that, and I saw so-and-so did it, and they just made a killing. Well, this notion of being able to put tools in the hands of folks that can innovate, I think this is another exciting development with the IoT.
By the way, that's why MIT has open courseware. The whole Khan Academy, it's not just a convergence of things on the internet. These are going to be platforms for innovators from all over the world.
So we only have a couple of minutes left, so I want to close out with one final thought from each of you. Can you each take 30 seconds, and where do you see, if you're an institutional investor, the greatest opportunity for IoT in the next year to year and a half?
Well, there's so many opportunities. I think you should be focusing on space that you understand so that you're able to navigate those waters correctly. You can pick infrastructure as an example, which is a big play for many years down the road. Also, the core technologies, the core, the chipsets, et cetera, that are going to be driving a lot of this innovation. And then from my perspective, of course, security. I think security has to be baked into everything. And so looking for organizations and businesses that are addressing those issues now and looking towards them, I think those will be good bets.
Well, Intel's always the smart investment, so I want to start with that. I think as we talked about today, there are areas of, from the industry perspective, the markets, some of the early adopters, whether it's health, retail, energy, transportation, buildings, these are market segments that are finding specific value from IoT. So I think taking a look at the leaders in those areas is wise. And I think I would also just kind of comment on the fact that, we are now in a world where smart and connected devices are becoming part of our lives. And so whether you're looking on the consumer side or the industrial side, I think you want to expand your view that you need to be looking at things from a smart and connected standpoint and look through the opportunity to see if there is additional value being generated from any of the companies you may be looking at.
Okay.
I take fundamental value investing seriously, and I look at themes in that regard. And I'm going to go back to the phrase that I used earlier, which is, who are the bottom-up enablers, device-to-device, silicon-up enablers, baking security in enablers of Internet of Things? Who are likeliest to be leaders in that category or facilitating, supplying the leaders in that category? I'm going to look at top-down. Who has the best vision of what an Internet of Things full stack operation has? So to the extent that you think Uber is a platform that facilitates these things as opposed to a really clever way of doing taxis, then that might be. But the other one is to double down on what Erica's saying. It says, Internet of Things creates a different value and opportunity for infrastructure creation. Google and search became part of an infrastructure. Who did search 20 years ago? You went to the library. Now who doesn't do search?
Exactly.
Mobile. Okay. So if you have a vision of what the future, whatever your future image of infrastructure is, it's going to be enabled and shaped by Internet of Things. So you look at the Venn diagram, the intersection of those things, that's where you should put your money.
Well, I'd like to thank the panel for joining us today. Again, I've been speaking with Michael Strag of MIT, Bridget Carlin of the Intel Corporation, and Eric Lakin of Duff & Phelps. Thanks for watching.
I thought we did okay. I thought it was okay.
Great.
How'd you think it went?
I think it went really well.
You
always fun
all
just
were just
talking.
really hitting the points. It was terrific. It was great.
It seemed like a really nice
That was really
dynamic.
dynamic.